Welcome to the Exceptional Sales Leader Podcast with Darren Mitchell. If you're a sales leader looking to take your leadership to a whole new level, then this is the podcast for you. We'll be exploring tips, techniques, and strategies to help you take your leadership to the exceptional level and allow you to enjoy more money, more meaning, and better sales results. Welcome back to the Exceptional Sales Leader Podcast, and welcome to it's an honor for me to be speaking to this lady coming in from Chicago. She's got a very good background behind her with all of her kids. When I say all of her kids, so 2 kids, and I just noticed there's a dog, Rebecca.
I do have a dog as well. Yes, a rescue named Peanut. Yep.
Peanuts.
Peanut. She's not quite small anymore, but when we got her, she was a tiny little peanut. So
love it. Love
it.
So Rebecca Grimes, welcome to the podcast, Chief Revenue Officer of SheerID. It's a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
We were talking before we pressed record about your 10-year-old son starting football, American football. And
Yes.
We're talking about my daughters who are now adults playing AFL football, and your daughter who's a track, do we say potentially a track protege?
I probably not. I think it's right now more of a hobby. She starts our middle school next year, so 6th grade next year, and it'll become more formal. She's also interested in volleyball. I think she's trying to discover what her interests are, but she's been in theater since she was about 6 years old. So
Nice.
that's 3 plays a year that she does, and she is very dramatic, and the theater translates into the home drama as well of theatrics when she hurts herself and needs 10 band-aids because I just fell. I need band-aids, and I can't walk. So she practices her acting quite frequently on us at home as well.
Love that. As my first question I was going to ask you, with all that and with the challenge of a 10 and an 11-year-old boy and a girl, and also running a big organization, does it challenge your leadership skills?
Yeah, I think that my husband would sometimes say, like, "Hey, you just logged off. We're a team now. Like, transition into family from work. Like, I'm very like, we got to get all these things done today." He's like, "Hello, nice to see you in the evening now." And so yes, but I am very fortunate. I have been leading global teams for the better part of my career. And I found a partner whose career allows me to travel and do my job, which is often, well into the evenings, occasionally on the weekends as well. And I have a whole support system that just makes this possible. So I feel very blessed, as a lot of women struggle to find the right balance. And for me, I just had to create the infrastructure to make this all possible, so that I can show that you can have it all. It obviously comes with sacrifices, but for me, it is well worth it to be able to do the things that I love, both at home and at work.
I love that, because you were saying also before you've got at least 2 days a week where you want to have a family dinner get together, because I know that you've got time differences you have to grapple with. And you mentioned also that the previous organization you had team in Australia, which is,
Yep.
As we're talking now, it's 10:15 in the morning, and it's late afternoon in Chicago. But then you've got the UK as well, which is another complication.
Yep.
It makes it
different technology.
Well,
WhatsApp calls in the morning from my UK team. I didn't have WhatsApp before I started here, but I know that's the preferred tool. So you adapt and you grow with every new role. So
and you go with it. So Rebecca, I do want to talk about your approach to sales leadership, and particularly the work you've been doing in the Chief Revenue Office, the last 3 organizations. And we'll talk a little bit about, the consolidation of organizations and the function of sales, and why perhaps organizations are now being centered under a CRO type role. But you started out not in sales. So I always like to ask the question, where did it all start for you? And was there a catalyst or a moment in time that sort of encouraged you to move into this world of sales?
Yeah, I started out as a crime reporter. I had graduated from college with a degree in journalism, and for me, that was my passion, storytelling and translating. The privilege of taking stories from humans and putting that into spoken word. And I mean, this dates back to before everything was digitized, where we were in university. I was editor in chief of our paper, and we had to make prints. So we had to take physical paper, drive them down to the printer. They would then be printing newspapers. Nothing was really online at that moment, but I knew that was what I wanted to do with my career. And I graduated and I joined a very small town, and I was a police reporter, and I was naive and young. And what is so interesting is in that capacity, I actually covered 7 murder trials in a span of the 11 months that I worked there. I was there maybe even not even a week, and there was another unfortunate murder. This is a small town. It wasn't dangerous in that capacity. It was a lot of inner family unfortunate situations. And so I was meeting with the district attorney at the state's attorney's office. I was meeting with victims. I was meeting with the accused, and working in the police department, attending coroners investigations. And it was this immersion into this adult life where there were very serious conversations that needed to happen, and I needed to be curious and lead with empathy and lead with urgency. There was nothing digitized, so I'd run from the courthouse, drive 30 minutes back. I'm probably one of the fastest typers on the planet, because I had to type as fast as I possibly could before we would go out to print mid morning. But for me, I have no regrets. What that actually taught me was how to have conversations with people, how to create a real connection with people to get them to trust you, but also to build upon that trust to create an ongoing relationship that would carry on. I'm still very connected with many of those colleagues that I worked with nearly 30 years ago. But
Wow.
then my car broke down, and I made 9.22 an hour, and I had no money to fix my car. And I had this moment where my father sat me down and he said, "Are you ready to do this for the rest of your life, of having no money because you've chosen a career that is undervalued and therefore underpaid?" And I said, "Probably not." And so I then pivoted, and my undergrad was in marketing and political science. And so I pivoted into marketing. And that was my first actual experience with sales. I sat inside of a $5 billion organization, and I worked on proposals and presentations and RFP responses for the sales organization. There was a whole team of us. There were 12 of us. And I got to understand the inner workings of how you needed to package things up for representing the organization, and how standard boilerplates were not sufficient to actually create differentiation from
Mm.
papers that looked identical if you stacked them up next to each other. And so I actually had a handful of sales folks that took me under their wings and really taught me how to translate marketing speak into real actionable sales strategies for winning. And that kind of just set me on this journey of curiosity around how you buy, how you sell, how you connect and tell stories, and how the stories need to evolve over time. And it really set me on this trajectory of just being curious about how you grow and scale organizations. And so I have no regrets about my early stage path. If anything, it really helped me mature fast and figure out that I needed to eat. I needed to create a path that allowed me to actually have a career. I still have many dear friends that are still in journalism. I miss it. But I also have family responsibilities, and that wasn't gonna carry me forward in life. So
And when you look back on, I guess, because I believe that everything happens for a reason, and it's setting you up for the next phase in your career or your life. Do you look back on your time as a journalist, and you mentioned the levels of curiosity you had to develop and the empathy you had to show, and particularly when you're reporting on um, like bad events, murder being probably the worst, you would have to have a level of trust that's developed with people in order for them to be able to share with you what could now be reportable. So did you find that that early part of your career helped you in the sales career, whether it be the relationship building, the empathy, the listening skills, but also being able to articulate a message?
absolutely. I also think it shaped who I became as a sales leader. I like to think of myself as an empathetic sales leader in the sense that I understand that, that this is everybody has a job to do, and this isn't their only thing to do in life. And so, as events happen and transitions in life happen around the folks that I'm responsible for leading, it starts with a place of seeking to understand how they're doing and checking in with them before we get down to business. That's how
Mm,
my one-on-ones start. I care deeply about the personal development of the individuals I'm responsible for, but I also took a lot of those learnings into how do you build trusted relationships with your buyer that isn't rooted in I know everything, I have all of the answers. It really is one where radical candor and transparency are centered at the core of the beginning of that relationship, and then it needs to be demonstrably repeated through actions, through language, throughout that whole buying process, and even after that buying process, because the last thing that you want is a whiplash of I was oversold, and the reality on the other end of it is not what I expected it to be. I think that I take deep responsibility, especially in my now leadership role over the last several years, where I'm
yeah.
accountable for growing the business. That word of mouth is just as important today as it was 15 years ago before the internet existed. And so, the way that we show up every day, the way that we show up in front of our customers and potential customers, it all needs to be consistent. And I think that's one of the reasons why I really enjoy and likely will never just run one of these disciplines, between sales, marketing, and customer success again, because the ability to align those teams around a centralized goal of creating good, healthy revenue and making sure that the handoff experience feels like a baton handoff between a race and not a restart with every new function that they're interacting with.
Yeah.
And so that's been something that's been really important to me as I've grown in my career, is to make sure that at the center of it, I am a customer obsessed person, regardless if my marketing hat is on or my sales or my customer success hat's on.
And it's interesting you say that because there's a lot of organizations that will have as a bit of a catchphrase because of the vision statement or their value statement that says, we put the customer at the center of everything we do, right? We are quote unquote customer obsessed until the bottom line is being affected or until their revenue line is not where it needs to be, and therefore the behaviors start to change. I wanted to ask you that as a salesperson before you became a sales leader, um, what was there anybody you had in your corner? Because you mentioned before a lot of the sales guys were helping you take the marketing message and distilling it down into a customer focus sort of message. Did you have people who would be mentoring you or sort of coaching you to help form your approach, which has now become a really strong foundation for what you do today?
I have been so blessed with so many coaches and mentors throughout my career, from CEOs that I've worked with at multiple organizations throughout the years to, a sales leader who took a chance on me. The real pivot that I made into sales came after, at least a dozen years in marketing roles. I had mastered all of the marketing roles. I had joined an organization, and we completely did a pivot in what we were selling to the market. The ICP, everything was a material pivot. And I spent 2 years completing that transition and that pivot, and I wasn't seeing the translation of the growth that I expected to happen, given the opportunity that sat in front of us from our analysis of what our total addressable market was. And so I went over to the new sales leader and I said, I want to figure this out. Put me in your team, and I want to go on the road, and I want to sell alongside the team. I want to build a solutions consulting team and an SDR team. And I want to really figure out how to scale this business faster because I know it has the potential. And through that experience, I realized that MQLs were heavily overweighted to make marketing look better than we were actually delivering and supporting the business around. That the message that we were delivering to the market was really centered on us and not on our buyers. And for me, that was this aha moment that I had where, you obviously want to talk about the business and the value and the solution and services that you provide, but translating that into the value and the problems that you're solving is it's a different message that you send to the market than thought leadership. It is really
Mm.
understanding the language that they use, understanding the measures of success that they're held accountable to, and then how do you sell into that organization, create buy-in, At the time it was a new technology, so it wasn't ripping and replacing another technology. I've done that as well. That's really hard too. But evangelizing, a new program is something that requires alignment, conversations around, how does a program get funded? We're sitting here in a year from now. What does success look like when we're talking about our renewal? How easy or hard is that conversation going to be? A lot of that early learnings for me around how marketing is presenting one set of KPIs that were largely not tied to the same sales KPIs is why I do the role that I do today.
Yeah.
Because when you sell a bad deal, you're basically throwing that over the fence into a customer success team who is held accountable to GRR. And so if that revenue is bad revenue, it doesn't make it through its first renewal cycle. What we've done is we've actually penalized one of our colleagues inside the organization, and we've neutralized the growth that we created with that new logo that we signed by it churning within the first year. And we're in this constant state of single digit growth when we're not really breaking it down and understanding what are good customers to sign up for and what are some of the customers that were the wrong fit for us and what were the signals that we should have done to slow down and potentially walked away from that business. And I will say that that's probably one of the biggest lessons that I've learned over the last 3 years is that not all revenue is good revenue. And that is really hard for salespeople to comprehend. But that's the neutrality that I get to play is I get to look at the long-term business objectives and goals and not a singular siloed KPI of measured success. And that allows me to make decisions that are in the best interest of our business, our shareholders, and ultimately all of our employees, not just the commission and quota retiring rep that sits within the sales organization.
So just with that, because we'll sort of fast forward now, because I might come back because there's a few other questions I want to ask around that. As a chief revenue officer, how do you manage, I guess, the tension between the having to report profitability, margins, growth expectations with customers' expectations in terms of delivery of service, customer success metrics, with also the sales team who are hungry and they need to hit targets. So I'm always intrigued because every sales organization I go into, they are not necessarily hitting their targets or maximizing their potential, but there's a little bit of a disconnect. They say they're customer obsessed, they say they're focused on the customer, but if you look at all of their collateral and all of that language they use, it's very much me centric, how good we are. How do you manage
Yeah.
that as a chief revenue officer? Because you'd be having multiple different stakeholders you're going to have to manage expectations of.
Yes. So my revenue leadership team, which is a fantastic leader in marketing, sales, customer success, and revenue operations, those functions are measured on a single metric, which is net bookings to the business. Now, of course, we've got other KPIs that we measure: GRR, NRR, total new bookings, expansion, cross sell, upsell. New logos, all of those are metrics that sit below a net bookings target that we manage together as a team. And we have a rule of there's no finger pointing within our organization. So when the leads are slow, we come together and we collaborate on how do we identify a new vertical, a new sub-vertical. What is the market telling us? What are the headwinds and tailwinds that we should either be hesitant around continuing down a specific path and or doubling down all of our efforts to go focus on? And everybody has an equal seat at the table. And what that means for me is that when we have oversold something, which we've definitely spent the last over a year. I've been at SheerID for coming up on 2 years in June,
Okay.
but we spent the last year just really breaking down close loss reasons, both in new business and in our existing customer base, and then we're looking for similarities between those because it does nobody any good. And I mentioned, when it doesn't make its way through the first renewal, and our compensation plans actually have clawback written into them. So if you're paid on a deal and it doesn't actually make it through its first renewal or it contracts in
Yeah.
that first renewal cycle, it's punitive to the salesperson. So that salesperson has to own that account all the way through kickoff of an implementation through that first renewal cycle. And we've also changed the thinking about land and expand. And in many of the cases, we are so fortunate that we get to work with some of the world's most admired brands at SheerID, and I get to go meet with many of them as well in my capacity as executive sponsor. I get to pick and choose maybe some of the accounts that I get versus some of the other executives on the team. Um,
We won't
but
mention
you know
names though,
what?
will we?
Yeah. But what that means to me is that when we encounter a situation, we work it out amongst ourselves. And in many cases, they work it out and then come to me with the recommendation or the resolution. And so we have solved for the fact that we are all focused on net bookings, which means that if we're having a softer quarter on new bookings, then how is retention performing? Because they could balance each other out. If retention is having a beat to their expected churn contraction, then that can counterbalance. Now, fortunately, in the last 4 quarters, we've been overperforming on all levels, and so I'm very fortunate in that respect. But in other organizations that I belong to as well, we did have those levers available to us. That if it was a softer season, we could then go refocus our efforts together and focus on expansion within the existing customer base to rebalance out that net new, selling motion that might, have some seasonality or some
Mm,
softening. Obviously the pandemic, rattled the business that I was running at that time, and so we had to do a complete pivot in our go to market strategy during the pandemic because our buyers were at home and they no longer needed our services. And so,
yeah.
I think that there's an expectation that there is nothing that I won't ask my team to do that I won't be willing to do myself. And there's also an expectation that we all own revenue together. And what that looks like is my SVP of sales jumping into action a few weeks ago to go support a renewal because he happened to be the locally fastest person to go do a face-to-face meeting. And he didn't benefit at all from that. In fact, he volunteered. He didn't even need to be asked. And that's really the culture that I care about the most, is where it isn't just words that I speak or expectations that I have on my team. It is the rest of the team leads by example. And
Mm,
through that, it becomes real. And then everybody else behaves and steps up with like that same attitude and that same culture of, no, we are all in this together. We are one revenue team. And in my world, one revenue team isn't just the span of control that I have across my teams. It actually is the entire company needs to operate as one revenue team, because if product isn't innovating, if support isn't being responsive and meeting our customers' expectations on turnaround and SLAs, then that creates a churn risk or a word of mouth challenge for our
yeah.
sales organization. And so that was one of the first things that I did when I joined, and it's a fun mantra that we do at all of our all hands meetings. Is we are one revenue team. And when somebody's like, congrats to the sales team or congrats to marketing or whatever, it's like, nope, congrats to the entire organization, because nothing happens with just a singular team for success. And it's really powerful. It's something that executive team needs to get behind. And I'm very fortunate that this is a very special company where when I joined, everybody was on board and ready to go through this transformation. I think mostly because they knew that the potential for us to grow was there. We just weren't firing in all the ways that we could to get there.
Yeah, I love that. I love that because I was gonna ask you because you've probably already talked about it a little bit. Have you built a specific sales leadership philosophy? Because it sounds like all hands to the pump, equal responsibility, no finger pointing. You've mentioned empathy and curiosity, but I'm also interested in perhaps organizations that you've been part of as you've been evolving and growing through your career, where perhaps there was this disconnect, where perhaps there was more of a focus on whether it be a silo mentality. I've got to look after my own patch first. What do you mean you want me to go and talk to that customer? I don't get anything. I don't get anything from that. So why would I go and do that?
Yeah.
Um, so have you over time created for yourself a sales leadership philosophy that, and it's probably always continuing to evolve, that you think is replicable, that can be the foundation for a sustainably successful organization?
Yeah. I have it. A lot of that also is, coupled with, the way that we lead from a place of curiosity and always be learning. And change is a constant. It is not a process that we go through and then we get to the other side. And in some cases, that requires some transition of folks inside the organization, voluntarily or involuntary, that aren't aligned to what we're building together. But there's an expectation inside the teams that I lead that we do this together. This is what we are signing up for. We're signing up for the hard, but we are also accountable to the brands that we service, which means that the expectations need to be high.
Mm,
When you rally the team around this, and again, I've been fortunate to be surrounded by folks that are brand new to me, but also folks that I've worked with in other organizations. That my North American sales leader right now, we worked together, I don't know, 8, 9 years ago, in a capacity. And when an opening presented itself, I gave him a ring. I said, "Love you, throw your hat in the ring for this." And now we're working together again. And I've got a dozen examples inside this organization of roles that we filled through people that I've worked with before. And so bringing also in some of those folks that understand my leadership, have an experience that are also those internal champions that are,
mm.
this isn't an inauthentic Rebecca. When she shows up, this is her true self. And I think that is me leading by example. That when we are doing hard things together, that it makes it easier for them to believe that what we're building together is possible. And I think that that's evidenced just by the way that this team rallied over this last year and the growth that we've had. And there were a lot of curveballs that were sent at us through that growth. And we just came off of a long weekend. We were off for Monday here in my organization at SheerID.
Yep.
And all weekend long, people were online. There was the customer service escalation, a call got scheduled, and it wasn't, what do I get out of this? It was like, there's an urgent problem. We've got to solve it together. I'm going to get a quick call. We're going to debrief everybody so that they stay informed. And that doesn't happen without everybody in the organization believing in the leadership, and not just me, but the rest of the executive team being bought into, this philosophy. But from a sales perspective, I've had to say no to deals that were not the right deals for us. And I've had to had those difficult conversations. I've also had to talk to product about a new market opportunity that we're going to have to disrupt the roadmap, because I really believe that there's something here, and here's the evidence and the market opportunity that I think. And that all just comes from a place that's grounded in data to inform those decisions, but also trust across the organization that
Mm.
we're in it together.
I love that because you mentioned earlier radical candor, and John Maxwell's voice continues to come into my head where he talks about the fact that you've got to genuinely care about your people, because there's three questions your team are asking. And one of those questions is, do you care about me as a person? And then if you do that and you've got a really strong foundation of trust, you can have that really detailed, difficult conversation, but you know that it's being done, and the person should know it's coming from a place of care because you're trying to help this person get better and actually benefit the organization. Now, it was also interesting you saying that you need sometimes to actually say no to customers, but also no to internal people as well. Um,
Yeah.
how hard has that been for you? Because I'd like to suggest that perhaps that's not normal in most corporate organizations. Most corporate organizations have for want of a better term, a siloed sort of mentality. Sometimes it's by design, most of the time it's not. How difficult has that been for you in your career? And do you think the fact you've actually been able to do it has led to, I guess, the engagement and the quality of the team you've built around you?
I, it absolutely is one of the hardest things to do. I think that there is a pragmatism that I bring to the table when we're having those conversations. And so when it's not emotional, when we're not talking about, doing a custom build for a customer, because if we don't, they're going to leave us. When it is pragmatic and we're talking about, this is the use case that they've identified. We actually have 4 other use cases that are very similar to this. And so with tweaks to this, I think we can actually productize this, and we can actually go and cross sell this into the other customers. And that is supported by A, B, and C. And then having real conversations about what the trade offs are going to be in terms of, other things that were already prioritized. But I mean, that only happens over time. It definitely was not a light switch, that happened. Specifically at SheerID, our CEO stepped in, and then I joined shortly thereafter. And so there was a lot of change management at the top of the organization, and so trust had to be rebuilt with most of the organization. And I was very fortunate that there were a handful of folks that said, I don't know you, but I'm here for it until you aren't authentic as to who you show up as every day. And those have been the real people that have transformed and turned this business into, a double digit, growing organization that we all are incredibly proud of the way that we show up at. And the no's are not easy. And I'm not here to be popular. I'm here to make sure that the team equally is represented across the organization and that there is a minimization of thrash in the way that we disrupt the other teams that also have their own KPIs and accountabilities that
Mm.
they are measured on. But we do have those healthy debates internally, and sometimes the answer is no, and sometimes the answer is yes. But once we align on a decision, we move on. The decision has been made. We are aligned as a team, and what that means is that we work through whatever the fallout happens from as a result of that decision. And I think that is hard to build.
Mm.
I've been in organizations where that has not been the case. And I've also opted out of organizations where we couldn't get to that kind of rhythm as a team, where the thrash is just too much that you can't actually focus on anything because everything's a shiny object. And we say yes to everything, which means that we actually don't have a strategy. We've got a whack-a-mole situation where all we're doing is constantly pivoting and changing and never finishing anything to its potential. We're deploying a lot of MVPs that don't actually turn into products,
Yeah.
and all of that matters. We cannot grow and scale a business if we're operating that way. Again, I've had some really fantastic journeys that I've been a part of, but this recent journey at SheerID has definitely been exactly what I wanted, and it has exceeded my expectations in the way that this team has come together and really embraced a path forward that we have found great success in.
And through that process, I did want to ask you, and apologies if it is a gender-based question, because I know I work with a lot of females in sales leadership that have had to almost prove themselves in many cases more than the males. In your being the authentic you, because I know you've described yourself as being quite direct, quite very empathetic, very curious, but direct, right? You don't have the issue with having that radical candor when it serves the greater good. How challenging has it been in the organizations? And when you mentioned before that perhaps there was a little bit of a misalignment, were that one of the reasons why you said, "Hey, there's a values mismatch here, but I'm going to stay true to myself, and when I find an organization that I can truly be, not that I weren't my authentic self, but I can truly be respect for who I am, not who I perceive to be, or not what my reputation says I am." How challenging has that been for you, particularly as a female in a big organization?
Yeah. Um, I mean, I think it varies by organization. I've been in, pretty heavily male executive team
Yeah.
environments. I'm also in a very balanced one here at ShareID. And, there have been many times in my career where I have been quieted, either verbally or non-verbally, with like, nope, stop, verbally in meetings. And what what I said to myself many years ago, once I kind of landed and figured out what my career was going to be, really leading all of these revenue teams, what I made a commitment to myself is that my values cannot be compromised. I can acclimate to different types of organizations. I've done everything from selling homes to selling data center infrastructure to now, working with brands to make sure that audience data is valuable to the way that they think about lifecycle marketing. And so for me, I can adapt and translate those values into each organization that I work in. But it is important for me to show up and be my authentic self, and what you see at work is the same person that you see outside of work. And when I can't be that person, when I find myself hesitant to speak up in a meeting, or when I find myself making decisions that are contradictory to what I know to be the right decisions, that's when I take a critical look at, am I in the right organization, or do I need to have a radical conversation about,
Mm.
this is what you hired me to do. I'm not able to do that because of these reasons. Maybe we got this wrong. Maybe this isn't the right environment for me,
Mm.
and or maybe we need to consider some changes in the way that our work dynamic is to better support voices that are not male.
Yeah.
I also, I go to CRO summits and I can predict how many females are going to be in the room and things like that. But I'm also very blessed to have, there's a women in sales community here that was founded in Chicago that I'm very active in. In fact, I've hired two folks that I met as part of that organization, and we have a very balanced team in terms of diversity, and that's important to me, diversity of voices. And so when I feel that I'm in a team where that is compromised, I don't show up as my best self, and those that know me know something is not right, and then I make difficult decisions, either having that hard conversation, which I am now much more comfortable having than I was 15 years ago.
Yeah.
But I'm also a mom, and so my kid will run in on a meeting, and that's okay,
Well, peanuts will come
and
in.
and I walk around my house with my headset because I have to go put the dog out. Like, we're all humans at the end of the day, and obviously I plan, for things so that it isn't as disrupted when I have important meetings going on. But I think being able to show up every day as your yourself is really important. It's a fundamental value that I have not always been able to feel I lived up to. And it's taught me a lot about how I need to lead from the front and make it okay for
Mm.
anybody to to feel comfortable challenging status quo and saying this isn't what I thought it was going to be, and let's have a conversation about it.
Yeah.
I genuinely appreciate that those environments exist. If you had asked me 15 years ago, I probably would have thought that, like, they didn't.
Yeah.
I can recall very vividly sitting in a room where I was making a pretty big presentation inside a billion-dollar company, and all men in the room, and I was asked to go get a coffee, and I was like, I'm I'm about to present, and you want me, so is there
Wow.
somebody else? Can you get your own coffee? And, like, I was like, that was a test in the very moment of me at the beginning of the meeting. And I stood my ground and I was like, unfortunately, I can't go get you coffee. I'm sure there's somebody else that can take care of that for you. And, and, that did not work out the best for me. I had a pretty painful next 6 months after that, with some of the folks that were in that room. But I, that's what I needed to do in that moment. And, I still had, a fantastic time there, but, there was a part of me that, regretted in the moment doing that, because 6 months later, it was still this sting that felt
Yeah.
with a
Yeah.
handful of folks inside that
Yeah.
organization. And I don't want anybody to ever have to feel that moving forward. And so, you know,
That's I mean, it doesn't surprise me, Rebecca, that sort of behavior. Um, but it's unacceptable. And
yeah. But I will
it,
also say I have had some of the most fantastic male leaders and advocates and champions in my career as well. I feel very blessed that it isn't just the females that have had their hands up and helping me climb within my own career. There are so many other fantastic male mentors and coaches that I've had that saw something in me and took me under their wings. And so, for me, it is just really about respect and the
yeah,
way that we show up and treat others, and everybody should be treated equally. And so that's the expectation that I have within my organization. So,
I love that because as you are very clear on what you stand for as a leader and as a sales leader, you don't have to then necessarily espouse that or verbalize that. It'll be shown through the actions you take on a daily basis, and that's character. And people would look at you and say, "Well, there goes Rebecca. And they should be able to then articulate what the values are because of the behavior that you demonstrate on a daily basis." And what that
yeah,
actually does, without you having to do it, it actually gives permission for others within the organization, within your team, whether they be male or female, or however they label themselves, for example, to behave in their authentic way, as long as we are
yeah.
aligned to the values of the team and the organization. And that's the most important thing. There has to be values alignment. But it's amazing. I'd love to ask you this. My experience with talking to a lot of leaders over many years is not all of them are clear on what their true leadership values are and why they're in the leadership position that they're in. What's your experience with that?
I mean, I was a leader at a very young age. I mean, my first job at McDonald's, I was promoted to team lead, probably 8 months into my career, and I was leading teams, and I was, doing schedules and managing hiring and new hires, and that would carry through college when I ran the newspaper, and throughout my career, I learned from the best leaders that I had, but also the leaders that I was like, oh, that's a trait that I don't want to emulate, and I want to be held accountable to if I actually do behave that way.
Mm.
And when I think about just my life experiences, I'm pretty open and candid. When I was 30, I was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and I went through chemo and I went through radiation, and I'm so fortunate. I'm coming up on 18 years being in remission, and
Nice.
that was a pretty pivotal moment in my life where the way that I show up at work needed to mean something. Like my legacy is obviously my family and the impact and the impression that I leave on the world. But I also feel this obligation to make sure that I am creating future leaders and that I am leading by example and I'm creating career opportunities within the organizations that where I can. We just promoted an SDR to an associate customer success manager within the team a few weeks ago. And so for me, this kind of second chapter of my life on the other side of cancer was really about like, how do I show up as a leader in my community, as a leader in my job, but also how do I make sure that the future leaders have examples of what good and great can be, and also not go back to the 22-year-old me that sat quietly and didn't raise her hand when I had an idea because I was scared about what the reaction could be. And
Yeah.
so that's generally not everybody has this kind of like midlife moment where they have to, you know, reassess everything that they had done up into that point. And that really just changed me in the way that I show up in my community. I'm very active in the American Cancer Society and doing fundraising and our local Relay for Life event, as well as just, the way that philanthropy and give back is just part of my DNA now. And that can show
Mm.
up in my community and my family and my friends, but also in the workplace and making sure that I have conversations. I have skip levels. I have an open door policy where anybody can drop out of my 80 folks on my team. Anybody can drop time on my calendar to connect, and I will make the time. And it always starts off with, "I know how busy you are," and I'm like, "I'm never too busy to have this conversation." And I think that that is where some leaders fall short. Is that
Mm.
no matter how busy you are, when your team needs you or they want to connect with you, you have to make the time for that, even if it's just to talk about a deal strategy or it's to talk about a really difficult time that they're having on the team and they want some advice on how to navigate something.
Yeah.
I think that leaders sometimes forget that they were once that person and either somebody did or didn't do that for them. And we have an obligation to make sure that we don't sit on a pedestal within our organizations and don't make ourselves available to support our teams in any way that they need to.
I'm I'm laughing because I see a lot of leaders that get into the position of leadership, whether it be a chief revenue officer or even a sales manager, well, first level sales manager. They think, oh, I've made it. I'm now in the management. I get a good car park closer to the door. I've now got an office with a real plant, not just a rubber plant. But I'm now really busy, so I don't have time to fraternize with the general population, and they find that they lose connection. And it's the leaders that say the greatest gift I'm going to give my team is the gift of my attention. And as you said, I'm never too busy to have this conversation. And you make yourself available because you need to be visible. And you're never going to be on a pedestal because you've said it. Your role now is to create other leaders. So you've got sustainability for the organization long after you left it.
But also, some of the folks that are the closest to the problems have ideas that aren't even considered by the leaders inside the organization. And so, some of the best conversations I've had have turned into project plans or new product ideas. And
Yeah.
so, they're closest to the problems. And so, the more distance you create, the more disconnected you are to the reality of
Mm.
what the business is actually going through. And I think that's a huge miss that some leaders make in not staying true to staying connected to everyone inside their organization.
Yeah. And if you, because you got 80 people, and it would be very easy for you, Rebecca, to get caught up in all the strategy. You've got a very important executive role. You're probably meeting key stakeholders on a regular basis. It'd be very easy to almost compartmentalize and say, I don't have time for my team. But the fact that you do that, you're basically saying, hey, I'm not above you. I don't have all the answers. You need to, if you've got ideas, you need to come to me with those ideas. If you've got challenges, you need to come to me with the challenges, but hopefully with some solutions before the, don't expect me to have the answer for you. And that just
Yes.
builds a really engaged culture.
It does, and it is part of the DNA of our executive team. We do fireside chats with our CEO at the departmental levels without the leaders in the room. Like it is just part of our ethos in the way that growth doesn't happen without an entire team aligned on what the mission is and what
Mm,
our respective roles are in supporting that. And so when somebody feels less than or one small cog in a big machine, um, they're not motivated, like I said, to get on a call over the weekend when they're potentially out enjoying the long weekend with their family. They're not motivated to get on a call voluntarily if they don't feel seen or appreciated or heard. And I think that companies that figure that out naturally then figure out how to grow. I think that
mm,
companies that struggle with their internal culture and the way that they think about the value that every single member of that team provides to the success of the business,
yeah.
they're the ones that are really struggling to connect all of the dots because they're the farthest from the feedback loops
Mm,
of the boots on the ground that are actually doing the jobs at the end of the day. And so I'm very fortunate. On Sunday, I leave to go to Portland. We're having our all company kickoff. We don't do sales kickoffs anymore. We
okay.
bring the entire company together and we spend several days together celebrating, kicking off the new year and sharing lessons. And it's not a bunch of executives on stage. It's actually the teams on stage and sharing their wisdom. And I'm very fortunate that like that is when we say one revenue team, that's what we mean. Like we're not just bringing the revenue team together in a room, we're bringing the entire organization in the room because we are all one revenue team. It's expensive both from time, travel, and the investment that we're actually making in our people. This is the second year we're doing it, so we're super super excited to do that. I was like, no more AK, no more SKOs. Like we're going to bring the whole company together. We can do that, right? And it's something everybody is looking forward to. We're
Yeah, nice.
largely a remote organization. And so we're bringing, the team from UK, like everybody's flying together and we're going to go spend really great, meaningful time together to build those personal connections that make it easier when you're having the tough conversations that it isn't all business. There's a
Love it.
calibration of emotion that happens because you've built an emotional connection that is real and authentic. And I can't wait to go hug all the humans that I haven't seen in a long time when I'm in Portland next week.
That is awesome. And does that mean, because the team is going to be sharing, does that mean Rebecca doesn't have to do a keynote?
Um, I'm on stage for like 25 minutes, and then the rest of the team comes up, and then
Okay,
that's it. So,
excellent.
25 minutes on stage, celebrating last year, solidifying the plan for this year that we've got in place, and then my leaders take the stage because they're the ones that are actually doing the work. I'm obviously helping facilitate that, but I am so fortunate to have an amazing team, and that goes all the way down. We've got individual contributors that are participating in leading sessions as well. Like it is a fully collaborative event. It's not a bunch of talking heads on stage, boring stuff. It is going to be truly an immersive environment where we come together as a team and we talk about the hard work that sits in front of us this year, like we did last year.
Brilliant. Love that. Love that. Now, hey, I love this conversation. I'm conscious of time. We haven't actually talked about SheerID as a company, and that's okay. But there was one question that was top of mind, particularly in your role as the Chief Revenue Officer, and that's that little topic called AI.
Hmm.
Um,
Yes.
from your vantage point, looking after the full, I guess, life cycle of customers, cradle to grave, how are you seeing AI play out as a sales leader? Is it something that you are buoyed by? Is it something you've got a little bit of trepidation around? How do you see that, particularly in the role that you've got with the organization?
Yeah. So AI inside our org is actually through many different lenses. And so the first one I'll talk about is just the way that we use AI tools. It is a staple within our organization. We are all using AI on a daily basis. I remember a year ago I was at an event, and they said raise your hand if you're using AI on a daily basis, and I was like a third of the room was not. And I was like, oh my God, what am I doing wrong? And now I probably don't even go an hour without using AI in some capacity, whether it's in one of the sales tools that we're using or our standard AI tools that we use internally just to move faster.
Yeah.
And so it's part of our DNA. We have an operational council that is really working on educating and empowering our teams to leverage AI to do their jobs better, not to replace them, but to do their jobs better and faster
Yeah.
and more efficiently. Um, AI failed me in helping me create a spreadsheet the other day. I am not the best at formulas, and I had to tap in our finance crew to help me with some modeling I was trying to do. AI and I were not gelling at that moment. So there's that one part of it where I think that we have an obligation to make sure that AI is a competency that everybody in our team uses, understands, and leverages. We then have AI as a new emerging market for us. And so if you think about there's a race to get AI into the hands of students.
Mm.
And we verify students globally. And so we've been fortunate this year publicly. We've been working with OpenAI, supporting their military program of getting military tools for recently transitioning military folks and starting getting them familiar and using AI. And then, we have, Perplexity, another AI organization that we partnered with last year. And so, we had to be agile. There was an opportunity that we saw. We slowly stepped into it, consumer AI. But what that turned into was this kind of massive opportunity for us as the only global solution provider that can engage with students and educators in some of the most complex and highly sought after countries like India, where they've got over 1 million universities and K through 12, um, schools, and we are the only provider that can go in there and support an opportunity to engage and acquire net new students. And
Wow.
so that's another part of it. And then obviously educators and all the other things that we do with healthcare professionals and the military and so when you look beyond that, then there's this other lens of where AI is part of our product offering. We have to move faster as we're processing these verifications in real time, and the way that we build out our data partners and how those get integrated when we sign up new data partners and they come into our back end. From a processing perspective, like we just have to move faster in the way that we're building
Mm.
code and deploying net new products. But then the last piece of it, when I think about AI specifically for SheerID, is we verify eligibility after these highly, sought after audiences. And the trust that our brands put in us is to make sure that the offer or the experience gets into the hands of the people that they intend to get it in front of. And synthetic documents and AI have made that incredibly challenging for us to have to really think about the way that similar doc detection, and we're now analyzing pixels on a paper to see if there are pixel manipulations, to see if it looks like a college registrar's document, but the date was manipulated or the name was manipulated. And so AI for us has been this, transformative in the way that we do business, but the way that we have had to evolve our product to make sure that our brand reputation on behalf of the brands that we represent, because we're a white labeled solution. So many
Yeah.
folks don't even know that they're using our solution because they're going through a completely, white labeled experience on the brand's website. And so
Mm.
the brands are entrusting us to make sure that the offers are protected, the experiences are protected. And so that's really had a transformation inside our organization, the way that we've had to adapt our product and our services offering to make sure that what we did 3 years ago was making sure that a student that graduated 6 years ago isn't still getting access to a discount. Now
Yes.
we're making sure that that student is even a human that exists, because the offer might be a $400 very valuable annual subscription to a product.
Yeah.
And that's very important to protect on the behalf of the brand. And AI continues to challenge us and keep us on our toes. And so AI is a big topic inside our organization, but there's definitely many lenses that we think about when the word AI is discussed.
Wow. And the interesting thing you mentioned there is AI is not replacing people. It's making things more effective, but it also comes with its own challenges. But yeah, and it was interesting. You mentioned that a third of the room put their hand up about using AI, and I wonder if the question was asked today. You reckon probably most of the people would put their hand up.
I think you have to. I mean, I think that people are scared of AI for lots of reasons. Obviously there's a lot of, headlines about companies that are creating efficiencies and are reducing their staff,
Yeah,
and replacing them with AI. I think that, when I had that kind of aha moment for myself, it was if if I don't learn to build AI into my daily ecosystem of the tools that I use, I will be replaced with a CRO that knows how to use those tools. And
yeah,
so for me, it wasn't fear that I was going to be without a job. It was fear that I would get replaced with somebody who had mastered how to use AI tools.
yeah.
And the best thing about AI, it's impartial. It is neutral. And so, some of my favorite things are to go look at the pipeline and go ask AI, tell me the yellow lights that the AE has missed in this opportunity. Tell me your confidence level in this closing in the next 3 days. It is this impartial, neutral, scans everything in, spits back out to you data that in many cases you could be blind to
Mm.
without otherwise having to go listen to 16 call recordings and going and looking at 50 email exchanges and all the red lines back and forth. Like, it is just this very neutral tool. And I'm so glad that I had that conversation and I was embarrassed in the room. And if I were to be asked again, I will confidently say I am likely using it every hour. And my daughter could probably go toe to toe with me because, man, they are learning AI faster than us oldies these days. So
Well, that's good to hear because it wasn't long ago the schools were banning the use of AI because they were thinking that people were just going to be using AI to write reports and so forth. But no, that's cool. That's cool.
yeah.
Hey, Rebecca, greatly, I love this conversation. People are listening to this, and we'll put some stuff in the show notes. Where's the best place for them to connect with you and learn a bit more about you, but also if they're interested in SheerID, where's the best place for them to go for that?
Yeah. Our website is SheerID.com. And if you happen to be in one of these audiences globally, students, educators, healthcare professionals, first responders, military, any of those communities, you can go to shop.sheerid.com and we list all the brands that we work with. And you can click directly there to get access to the programs that we support. You can find me on LinkedIn, and I will say that if there's a young sales professional out there that doesn't have a champion or a hype person or a coach or a mentor, please connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm very open in the way that I find time to meet with strangers, and in many cases I eventually end up doing business with them or connecting them with somebody to help them with a job, or simply giving them a boost in confidence that they might need at some point in their career. So please
Love
reach
it.
out to me. You're in Chicago, come visit me. I'm in the burbs. I'm not technically in Chicago. But this is a really fantastic conversation. Thanks for having me, Darren.
Terrific. Rebecca, it's been an absolute pleasure. Keep up the great work. And also, yeah, hopefully we'll see maybe your son in a few years' time in the Super Bowl
Oh,
and maybe
oh my
your
gosh.
daughter running in the Olympics. What do you reckon?
Oh my gosh. Um, Maybe. That's not my retirement plan that I'm counting on, but I love for that to happen. So
It's been an awesome conversation, Rebecca. Thanks so much for
yes,
joining the podcast. Appreciate it.
thanks again.
Thank you for listening to the Exceptional Sales Leader podcast. I trust the information in this episode has been helpful in your journey towards becoming exceptional. And remember, please take the time to rate the show, subscribe to the show so other people can find it. But also, if I can help you, jump on my calendar, go to leadwithdarren.com and let's have a conversation about how I can help you along your journey to being exceptional.